Well, hello, welcome to everyone joining here in the room, and welcome to those of you joining online. For those who are new, this is our Health Equity and Innovation series, which happens monthly in conjunction with the Bay Area Global Health Alliance, the Center for Innovation in Global Health, and the Stanford Global Health Lab. My name is Cyan Brown, and I'm Health Equity Lead here at Stanford Biodesign. So these talks are really designed to get us thinking about important issues when it comes to innovation and health equity. They're hosted monthly, and if this is your first talk, you can find all previous recorded sessions in our YouTube playlist. Just some quick housekeeping before we start today's session. It will be an hour long. Those of you in person, please do put your phones onto silent. The restrooms for those of you in person are right up the back and there. And for those of you joining us online, we'd love you to contribute questions towards the end and be as engaged as possible. I'd like to really thank all our partners for making this possible. Without you, we couldn't do it. And it's so wonderful that we have the chance to meet lots of different people with passionate interest in global health and health equity. So today, we're going to be kicking it off with hearing from Sarah Anderson. Sarah is the founding executive director of the Bay Area Global Health Alliance. It's a multi-sector network and membership organization that unites diverse sectors to drive global health innovation and equity. The alliance serves as a neutral convener and catalyst, fostering cross-sector collaboration and engaging the tech industry alongside traditional global health stakeholders from academia, NGOs, and the public and private sectors. Under the leadership of Anderson and the board, the alliance has expanded to 90 institutions, organizations, and companies from across the globe since 2020, which is really a remarkable feat, Sarah. More than 30 years of experience in global health, international development advocacy, nonprofit management, partnership development, thought leadership, and strategic communications, she has a proven track record of driving impact. Before leading the Bay Area Global Health Alliance, Anderson was at the forefront of advocacy efforts and pioneering movements, including global surgery, raising awareness about debilitating burn injuries in low-income countries, and addressing the famine in North Korea. Her work on Capitol Hill with various campaigns and nonprofits focused on shaping US government policy and building strategic partnerships to influence policy and change lives. Additionally, here at Stanford, she has served as a coach and partner in Stanford's D-School Design for Extreme Affordability program. And we're really thrilled that she was able to join us today, and that Stanford is a member of the Bay Area Global Health Alliance. And we look forward to continuing this partnership even more. So without any further ado, I welcome Sarah to kick us off for today.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, and we're just thrilled to be part of this partnership. Stanford has been a founding member of the Bay Area Global Health Alliance since the beginning. And since you've just heard a lot about who we are and what we do, I thought I would tell you a little bit about what we're doing right now. So I also wanted to just let you know a little bit about our name. Our name may be a little bit like Bay Area. We're now only about 36% of our members are based in the Bay Area, but all the major universities in the area are part of the Alliance, as well as a lot of other tech members from the Googles and the Metas to many other smaller startups. We also have many pharma companies from Gilead and Merck and Pfizer are wonderful members, but also like Medicines 360, which I think was on campus recently speaking about the way they work. And they're so interesting because they are a nonprofit pharma company really working on equity and access. So we have so many members that are just wonderful, and I feel so lucky to be in this job and get to meet all these people and see folks. And it's nice to have all of you here today. I wanted to let you know of a few things and a few ways that you can get involved, because so many of the things that we do, we're known as a neutral convener, as well as a partnership broker, and also do a lot of one-on-one connections. So let us know what we can do for all of you. As students at Stanford, you are certainly welcome to come to any and all of our events. Almost all of them are open to the public, so you can invite your friends. Many of them are hybrid events, so available to people all over the world. And we're so lucky that we now have about 12% of our members and growing are from low resource settings and low resource countries. And we're really trying to grow that section of our base. We're also about, I guess, almost 40% based who are associated with technology and innovation. So come join us on many of the things. Some of the things that we're doing right now, we're working, we help form the partnership of bringing Merck and Meta together to look at what is the impact of social media on health outcomes. And so we have a work with them on advancing health online, and we're working with Stanford, the Center for Digital Health, to kind of look at AI and looking at AI and social behavior change. AI is one of our signature initiatives, and we also have an AI and global health series, which is a little bit different than many of the other series you may see, because it is really about digging into what's really working, what are people on the ground using and how, and what do they need to know from here. We also have a new, we were at UNGA in September at the UN General Assembly, and at the Clinton Global Initiative, we initiated a new partnership and a new commitment on looking at AMR, antimicrobial resistance, and how can you help curb that by using maybe an outcomes-based financing mechanism. So we're exploring that with PATH and Pfizer, and that's another example of one of the partnerships that we have. We're also, with our AI and Global Health series, we'll be in Nairobi at the beginning of December, and with looking at AI and social behavior change, but that will be a hybrid event, so you're welcome to join us online. And there are many other things that we're working on. We're working on partnerships and really looking at, so many times we talk about multi-sectors, and we serve kind of a little bit as a code switcher of like what pharma is saying and what the tech people are saying. It's like, here's playing the role as a translator. So one of the things that pulls in is kind of looking at partnerships and the partnership health. So there may be all these wonderful multi-sector partnerships, but are they equitable? Are they really working well? Is anyone paying attention to the kind of the goals once you did it and got the proposal done? Are people communicating and talking about their failures and things like that? So we're really exploring that. And that's another thing that we're working on now. Many other things I could go on, but we really want to hear from Krista, right? And Krista Donaldson, we're very, very lucky that she serves as on our board of directors. Krista and I met at the D School years ago with the Design for Extreme Affordability program. So I'm quite honored to be able to introduce her today. As you know, she's been recognized by the World Economic Forum as a TED speaker. So many different things, but I think she's very, very well placed now as the Director of Innovation and Impact here at Stanford Biodesign. Before that, she was at Equalize Health and really founded that program so she's got that experience of being on the ground, figuring out what people's needs are, and then figuring out how to develop products that really serve the people. And what she did with Equalize Health, which was formerly known as DREB, is quite remarkable. And I hope that she'll be talking about it more. But more than that, she's just a wonderful human being, and we're just so delighted to have her on our board. And without further ado, I will have Krista come up here.
All right. Okay, I might be advancing slides manually. That's totally fine. All right, great. So just to give you an overview. So first of all, welcome. It's so wonderful to see so many of all of you here. For today, I'm going to give a brief background, but I'm not going to do like the bio. What I'm going to do is just give you some hints of like lessons learned in previous jobs that affect very strong opinions around innovation and health equity. If you know me already, you know I have a lot of opinions. I'm going to talk about Equalize Health and use one of the products as a case example of bringing a product that's designed to address a health equity gap to market and to scale at global scale to solve a problem. I'll talk about that, and then I'm going to finish with like some lessons learned. And when I was preparing this deck, I had something like 11 lessons learned, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna read it down. But I am happy to talk about lessons learned and failures. We like to call failures lessons learned. But I'm happy to talk about those at any time with anyone because you guys are the future, right? So, and I feel like some of us who have pushed some boundaries, meaning to or not, like there's no good in doing that if we can't help all of you. All right, and I also did warn you, this is going to get a little bit interactive and you'll see when this comes about. And so for the folks online, sorry about that, but just you'll have to have answers in your head. So I know we have at least one undergrad here, but just to get started, I studied mechanical engineering. This is in my freshman dorm. You can see my teddy bears there. I studied mechanical engineering and I went to Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt's very famous for the alternative spring break program. I know we have one here at Stanford, but I mention that because it got me very engaged in the social sector. And we weren't calling it social justice then, but it really got me very invested in understanding like why do gaps exist? Why is there poverty? What does that lead to? And all those kind of surrounding issues. And I will mention, I'm going to date myself, there was no Engineers Without Borders. Like a lot of you guys who are younger, like you had the benefit of getting to like join clubs like that. We didn't have any of that. And in fact, in the social sector, we weren't even talking about the role of technology and the potential for innovation to play a role in solving some social issues, or addressing, I should say. And then I came to Stanford for grad school, and some of you know this is the product realization lab. I was a TA there for a couple of years. But what I really loved about that, and one of the things that took away, was learning to make things. And I think there's a big thing, you know, many of us have spent a lot of time in academia. We're really good at thinking things and big ideas, but at some point you actually have to do it. And when I was finishing my PhD, I know many of you are thinking about your next career steps. So I was finishing my PhD, I was like, do I go the academic route? Or do I do the, like, what I considered, like, I want to actually go, like, try and solve the problem. Like, I want to go and do that. Not to say you can't do that in academia, but I wanted to go get the operational experience and really learn from, you know, from the people I was seeking to learn about. So spent 5 years in Kenya, not quite 5 years in Kenya, working with an organization called Kickstart. And Kickstart does a treadle pump, and I was doing my PhD at the same time. Who's familiar with the treadle pump? Anyone? Okay, a few people, one person, Sarah. What it is you see it here, it's called the Super Moneymaker Pump, and it's you shift your weight back and forth on treadles, and it can pull water from up to 6 meters and push it another 6 meters. So in hilly country like upcountry Kenya, this is really important for farming. And those of you who are sharp-eyed are going to know, actually, this is a picture from West Africa because they started to scale. But for a farmer, a smallholder farmer that has like a hectare, they were previously usually a farmer, and often a woman farmer, was relying on rainwater. She was pulling buckets from a nearby well, and the pump you could dig a well, and then now it's much easier to put the water out. So what you saw with farming is increase the quality of the crops, increase the growing seasons, and also increase the acreage. So what that means to people in real life is like they have more money. They could send kids to school. They could do all these things that they couldn't do before. So with them, I was a manufacturing engineer. And a big lesson learned from this is I was very excited when I learned about Kickstart and actually heard about the founder gave a talk here at Stanford. That's how I first got connected with him because he was a Stanford grad. But I really learned it's like, you know, the focus is on the pump, right? Like that's the solution. And I'm going to talk about solution, but really there's all this other stuff that gets into solving the problem. It's not just the product. It's not just the pump, right? There's like 70 jigs and fixtures that went into the manufacturing of this pump because quality control is an issue. I also really was part of this great team. Like, how do you ensure that the pumps are actually reaching the farmers who most need them? That's where it's going to make a difference. So it was a really lesson learned for me. My first summer I spent in Nairobi was 1998, which is the year of the embassy bombing. And some of you may have not even been alive at the time, but bombing in Kenya and Tanzania, thousands injured, hundreds killed in Nairobi. And I think for many of us, and you have to imagine this is pre-9/11, this is pre-ISIS, pre-Taliban, it was a real shock, I think, to many of us to realize that we lived in a world where this sort of thing happens. And it was a turning point for me, I think, too, not only being in Nairobi and seeing the impact, but also it made me think a lot about, you know, some of these issues that came up with alternative spring break, like the link between poverty and terrorism. And it also made me much more conscious of health, where I had not been involved in health before. So I graduated my PhD and I worked for the State Department and I did reconstruction in Iraq on electricity. And this was quite an experience. And for those of you who followed the news at the time, it was like well, I won't use any bad language today. I'm known for doing that sometimes in seminars, but it was a bit of a mess. And my job, I was a peon part of the State Department, but as an engineer trying to make electricity reconstruction work. And you see me here with several of my colleagues at a power plant in South Baghdad called Dora. When I joined the State Department, we thought things were going to be quite secure. Oops, they weren't. The big lesson I took away from this, and this is a photo of a transmission line going into Baghdad. If you think of transmission like super highways of electricity, there were 4 or 5 of them going into Baghdad at the time. So if you want to destabilize a capital before an election, it takes 4 IEDs strapped to the side of one of these. So this is a picture from a helicopter. We would fly the lines. But the big takeaway for me, as thinking high level about how do you solve problems, the US government, my policy friends in the room, were very focused on building power plants. That's how they were solving electricity construction. We were not thinking about the system. We were not thinking about transmission lines. We were not thinking about distribution. What matters is when someone flips a switch on in their house, are they going to get AC? Are they going to get their light? And we can talk more about policy another time, but a lot of lessons learned about designing to solve a system problem as compared to focusing on the thing, the widget. In this case, not a water pump, a power pump, right? Thinking like a system. So fast forward, Sarah mentioned Equalize Health. Equalize Health started as an organization called DREV that I took over around 2008, short for Design Revolution. We started as Equalize Health, and it was a nonprofit medical device company. And I turned into health, and it really was a start from the Nairobi days, but also in the early days of DREV. We worked on all different types of products. I should go back. But it was really interesting to me from a healthcare standpoint. To me, it felt like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And I'll give some examples as we get going. And I'm not going to spend time here because I am the Director of Innovation Impact at Stanford now. At Biodesign, I do 2 things. I think many of you know this already. I work on the East Africa Biodesign Program, and our fellows graduated today, our first class. I don't know if you guys knew that, but very exciting. Yeah, we'll get a thought from here. And then I work with Scion and health equity, and hopefully bringing some real changes to our biodesign program too with our other colleagues. So you're all here because you're just in health equity. And I feel like health equity really came into the consciousness, particularly of Americans with COVID. And some of you are probably like, oh God, we don't want to hear about COVID anymore. I always feel the reaction when I look at this too. But I think for many of the folks when I was running Equalize Health, there wasn't really an understanding of health inequity. But then COVID happened and there was a shortage, the vaccine, shortage of PPE, shortage of oxygen. You guys know all this. But I think it's important to remember too, we talk a lot about global health, but health equity is such an issue here. And again, I know you guys know this already. We talk a lot about maternal health, but there are so many examples where we dig, right? Like even syphilis rates. The rate of children born with syphilis is 5 times higher for Black babies than white babies in the US. And of course, this isn't just the US. I'm from Canada originally. We see a big health differential between our Indigenous community and the white Caucasian communities and how they're treated, and also the different disease rates. I am today going to talk mostly about international because that's where my experience is. So I'm going to start with an example of one of the need areas that we focused on at Equalize Health. This is a photo of a hospital in southern Rwanda. And for those of you who are not familiar with Rwanda, it's this beautiful country of green rolling hills, and this hospital sits at the top of one of these hills. And we met a pediatrician there, a colleague named Dr. Victor. Dr. Victor, I've anonymized his name, but this is him, and the story is true. But my colleague was there because the product I'm going to talk about, for example, today, it was being rolled out by the Rwandan government across all the referral hospitals, and she was setting up data collection. So he learned what Equalize Health did, which was designing medical devices to address health gaps. So we focused on maternal and newborn with some assistive technology. And he said, we need you guys to design a CPAP. And who here is familiar with CPAP, the positive air pressure? Okay, most cases. This is a great thing about talking to a prior design audience. But a lot of premature babies. Dr. Victor was trained at his medical school in Europe. And just to give you a sense of him, those of us who have kids, he's exactly the type of pediatrician you'd want for your kid. Like he's very open and earnest and very warm. But he was very frustrated because he did not have CPAP at his hospital. And my colleague asked him, well, what do you do when you have a premature baby who needs respiratory support? And he said, we're only praying for these newborns. It is really, really sad. So our first interactive portion, so our friends online, you'll just have to have this in your head. When was CPAP? I'm gonna have you vote with your hands. When was CPAP first introduced for newborns? Who thinks it was 1962? Hands. Okay, great. 1971. A few more hands. 85. Okay, about the same number of hands. 92. Okay, a little less. And 2001. Okay, no hands. All right, you guys are pretty good. So it was 1971 with the New England Journal of Medicine article. And I point this out in that CPAP for neonates has been around for at least 50 years. And yet a good portion of the world does not have access to the quality neonatal CPAP. And to me, like, this is pretty shocking. And I think for many of us who don't know that or aren't exposed to that, it's also, it's very disturbing. And I should mention too that respiratory distress is the #1 killer of newborns globally. And if we want to be able to end preventable deaths with newborns, CPAP is one of the main areas we need to focus. So we have these gaps, and we're going to do more interactive now. The gaps that exist that prevent the development of, again, quality, affordable treatments. So what are some of those reasons for the gaps? Does anyone want to volunteer any?
So there's no incentive for medical device company to sell the device with a acceptable price to
Great,
this country.
great. Yes, that is one. And I'm going to show some of these, but I want to hear from you guys before I show. So it was a good one to kick off. Yes.
The history of like colonialism, IMF and World Bank loans that are predatory and exploitative that make it.
Yes, we have structural adjustment. I did not put that in my answer. That's a great answer. Thanks, Charlene. Any other ones?
The requirements are different.
Yes, there's different user needs, right? Yeah. So by the way, guys, this is not getting judged. This is like all ideas are good ideas kind of approach. Okay, well, that was a great kickoff. So yes, to your point, market failure. So let me really the polite way is insufficient incentives for industry. The profit margins aren't high enough and it's a lot of work. There's inadequate reach by smaller companies. And so what we see now is a lot of particularly Chinese and Indian and Korean and other medical device companies reaching into different markets, but they lack the capital to really do it in a way that's often meaningful. So you'll see flagship hospitals in urban areas that are pretty well equipped. And then as soon as you get past like the peri-urban areas, then less access to quality healthcare. We also see a reliance on traditional business models. So for our biodesign fellows, I'll be teaching a class on alternative business models. And it's just a reminder too that we've tended to fall back on certain business models in med devices. And we really need to think about those with equity markets because they can actually cause problems. All right, to Austin, lack of user and market respect. And I know that's a little bit edgy, but really what we know from work we've done in the US, there's structural racism, there's care bias and weathering. So there's a whole number of issues that have prevented really understanding user needs and recognizing some of the disparities in how people are treated both institutionally and also when they come in for care. But I would also say an insufficient investment in understanding the user needs, which is what you were getting at. And I mention this because what you often see with medical devices designed for low-income settings, do you want to guess? Like we take a device that's designed for a Stanford hospital, what do? We defeature it because we want to make it affordable. And then we're like, okay, you and another culture and another health system, you should want this because like we defeatured it and it's affordable to you. But does that work? No, we know it doesn't, right? Like different places have different needs. It might be something as simple as like there's electrical surgeons and you need to think about the fuses or the spare parts. It could be supply chain around the consumables. It's any number of things. And then the last thing is that it's insufficient accountability and iteration. And this is my polite way of being a little bit judgmental about the global health funding community and that, you know, we see investment getting put into things that a lot of times don't work. And instead of like talking about it or ending those investments, like we kind of keep going. And so not having the same accountability that we might have in other sectors. Be more open about lessons learned. All right, so hopefully you guys have seen this photo before because if you go to a lecture here on devices, this is an equipment graveyard. And this photo is from Western Kenya. And this kind of embodies some of the things we just talked about. But why would there be devices that are kind of not thrown away? Because they're not thrown away. This is behind a hospital. But why would they be here? Don't be shy.
I just guess they need electricity.
Yeah, maybe a device was donated and it's on the wrong voltage system.
Yeah.
Happens a lot. You're right.
Is like a one-time use, or it's something just use a few times and then disposed?
Yep, and there might be an issue getting consumables. Great one, yeah. Erica?
Yeah, like you can't repair it or they don't know how to repair it. If
Yes,
Mm.
and it's happens a lot with donations, right? Because like a hospital might get 3 different CPAPs, all different brands, all different consumables. They need like 6 different nasal cannulas for babies and you only have 2 of them. I mean, not to say like they would end up here, but yes.
Lack of maintenance and lack of formation.
Yeah. All of these are exactly right. So, lack of spare parts, wrong voltage, not durable enough, inadequate training. There's often a lot of turnover, depending on the hospital. So, you know, it just might not get used. The other reason why these are here is because spare parts are often cannibalized because it is really hard to get spare parts. And so, you know, if something needs to be fixed, if there's an engineer at the hospital, they might be like, hang on, and run into the back and see if they have a device that they can grab a sensor off of or something else that's in use. All right, so I'm going to switch gears now and talk about Brilliance, which is one of the products we designed at Equalize Health. And this photo makes me really happy because it was taken by someone at Embrace, which is a health innovation company that came out of Stanford. And Jane Chen, one of the co-founders, is actually going to give one of the talks in our series soon. But she sent this around. I was in one of their advertising, and then I was like, oh, that's one of our devices in the back. So right there, but it's taken in a hospital in Uganda. And I have to say, like, as a med device innovator, one of the coolest things is when someone sends you a photo of like, oh, I just ran into your device in this hospital. And one of our GFITs last year from earlier this year in Kenya, he wrote me back. He's like, I didn't realize you designed this device in our hospital. Now we don't have exchange transfusions, which I'll talk about that in a minute. So it's super gratifying as a person be able to see that. So those of you who knows if they've had jaundice before? Okay, 2, Dan and Bingley. Okay, how many more of you have had jaundice? I'm going to show you the stats in a minute. This photo is my daughter, Avery, who's here today, but she was right on the cusp. 60 of treatment, by the way. So 60% of all of you had some degree of jaundice. So I want you, if this is a conversation you can have with a parent, I would be very curious to know who else has had it. But the important thing to know is that at least 12% of all babies need treatment. And what jaundice is, and the doctors will forgive me in the room if I explain it in very layman's terms, but hyperbilirubinemia is elevated bilirubin, and too much of it causes neurotoxicity. And when babies need treatment, they need to come in for blue light, which is why you see this, the blue there. And the blue light shines through the skin into the bloodstream, breaks down the bilirubin, and the babies are able to pee it out. And this is just because with babies, their livers are getting going. But the thing to know is that it's very time sensitive. And actually, hyperbilirubinemia, severe jaundice is the #1 reason why babies are readmitted. So it often appears a few days after birth, but it's the #1 reason why babies are readmitted globally. Few things to know is a conservative estimate when we were getting started on this project, and so this is around 2009, 2010, the estimates were about 6 to 7 million babies per year were not getting effective phototherapy treatment. And that's about 45% of all babies globally. The other thing to know is in the US, we consider kernicterus, which is the brain damage from untreated severe jaundice, to be a never event. Do you guys know what other never events are? Just to give you a sense. It's like operating on the wrong body part. Or you do surgery and you leave a tool inside the body. So it's preventable, it's easily preventable, and it's considered a never event here. Okay, so I promise this is the last history aspect, but when was blue light first validated as treatment for hyperbilirubinemia? We have, raise your hands again, 1941. Okay, great. See, now you guys are a little bit savvy. You're like, you know this so well. Okay, 2, 1958. Okay, a few more. 3, 1966. Okay, that seems to be the most. 4, 1978. Okay, one brave person, and 5, 1989. And one other brave person. Okay, so it was 1958. And so several of the leading experts of jaundice are actually here at Stanford. Dr. Vinod Bhutani, who's recently retired. But when he talks about the history of jaundice, this is the first paper by Dr. Kramer Richards and Perryman. And he likes to call it the first ever like jaundice biodesign team because Kramer was a doctor, Perryman was a biochemist, and Richards was an engineer. And they realized that blue light specifically could lower bilirubin levels. Of course, in the spirit of history, it wasn't actually them who first realized it. It was a nurse. In the literature, she's called Jean Ward, but Dr. Butani is insisting that her name is Judy Ward. And she was a nurse in the hospital in England where Kramer and all were. And she noticed that the babies by the window, their jaundice was decreasing. So anyway, just a nod to the trivia over the years. All right, so Equalize Health, where do we come in? We met a doctor at a conference. He was actually Indian, and he said, this is again like 15 years ago. He said, we are putting babies out in the sun for treatment. And so we know that the babies originally in the 1950s, their bilirubin levels were dropping. But what's the problem with relying on sun to treat jaundice?
Right.
Burn. Yes, that's one of them, UV.
Limited, like it only happens for like half of the day.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have a severely jaundiced baby, and also what if there's like a rainstorm? You know, like it's there's two other kind of things too. One, because we help do some user research around what's called heliophototherapy. Another one is that the ambient temperature needs to be very close to the baby's core temperature, right? Because you're putting someone out ideally in filtered sunlight, right? Taking the UV out. But if it's not like a good match temperature wise, you're going to have the baby too hot or too cold. This is why I love user research. Another thing that we saw is that mothers typically wanted to be holding their babies. No one really likes sticking their baby out in the courtyard, even under shoulder. You see the mothers hold them. And so of course, if you're trying to get as much exposure onto the skin, that's not going to work so well. We started to look into it with, I'll just say this here. So this project started in 2009. And those of you who read a lot of needs statements are going to laugh because this would have been the needs statement we wrote at the time, which I know you'd all say we have a scoping problem. But I'm going to put it here anyway. You guys can laugh at it. But the needs statement would have been a way to treat severe hyperbilirubinemia in neonates lacking access to treatment to end preventable deaths and disabilities. So we were kind of aiming high, and I'm sure we would have had some good feedback from the faculty. You know, that's how it is. So even with I saw the looks. Yeah, Vic and Dan are like giving me a thumb. They're like, bad example, Krista. Anyway, so we started to look into the problem after being alerted to it by this Indian doctor. And I showed the photo there is actually from Obamashah, Nigeria. That was part of the research. And we were looking to see, is there in fact effective phototherapy? Is there phototherapy at all? And what we found is in many hospitals, there's just no phototherapy. Again, keep in mind, this is 15, 20 years ago, just flat out no phototherapy. And then in other hospitals, there was phototherapy, but it might look like this. So can anyone tell me what's wrong here? We have two babies. We don't love two babies in the same bassinet because of cross-contamination. So I'll just put that out there. And these babies are mostly healthy. They need jaundice treatment, they need phototherapy, but they're premature. But why, what else is kind of wrong with the phototherapy here?
Doesn't look very comfortable.
Yeah, no, it's you're right. It's an acrylic box. It's not. I imagine it's not. We did see bubble wrap though sometimes. Babies, different hospitals. Yes.
I will say the light's just on the back of the baby. It's not everywhere.
Yeah. So the poor baby on the left, the baby's not actually getting much phototherapy, right? Because the bulbs, there's 6 bulbs and 3 of them are burned out. So baby on the left, and then also there's these giant diapers, which is another issue, right? Because you often see that in hospitals too, that there are the diapers that are available for the babies who are that small, which is limiting the skin, right? If you need to get the blue light through the skin, that's going to be an issue. So this is very common. This photo is from a large public pediatric hospital in southern India. This is another photo of another type of photo. If we did see phototherapy, what we saw. So what's wrong with this one? Not blue light. Yeah, is that what you're saying, Megan?
Also only from one angle.
Yeah, it's from one side, yeah. And you can see there's some bulbs burned out. And I know some of you are going to be physics nerds and be like, oh, well, there's blue light and white light. But the problem is it's not intense enough typically, right? So this was also very common. And this was typically what we see at the time, compact or tube fluorescent bulbs or compact fluorescent lights. And as we did our user research, it wasn't just around affordability. And to give you a sense, phototherapy devices, if you were to buy one here at Stanford Hospital, it'd be between $3,500 and $4,000. But in Nairobi, in Manila, in Cairo, they were paying anywhere between $6,000 to $10,000 per device. And we can talk about the reasons why for that, but that was the reality of what we were doing, we saw from our pricing. What we also learned as we did our user and market research, and I usually just call it all user research because market is part of users, right? Is that the cost of one bulb really varied. So it would be $23 per bulb in Delhi to almost $200 in Kampala, Uganda. So that becomes a big problem when you have 6 bulbs and you need to replace them every 3 to 6 months, right? So what do you have now? You have a high OpEx, right? Operating cost. So you're looking at like over $2,000 in Kampala and almost $300 in Delhi. And that doesn't seem much to many of you who worked in hospital administrations, but that is a lot in some hospitals. And there's also this issue, they're hard to source. A lot of the supply chains were not set up for medical grade bulbs. So it was a real problem. So I'm going to jump ahead to the final product. I'm not minimizing the product development process, but one thing I will say, we did a lot of user research. I'm going to talk about the key features, but actually the product development itself was part of the easier part. It was really around the business model and getting it to market. So you see Brilliance here. This is what we call Brilliance Classic, the V1. It used LEDs. And so that solved this issue of bulbs getting burned out. We were not the first to use LEDs with phototherapy, but we do believe we were the first to do optical modeling. So the LED plus the lens to get an even footprint on the bed and also start to bring down the price. The other thing too, we learned from user research is that 20% of nurses or healthcare workers get headaches from the blue light, which is why you want to tightly contain it to the footprint of the baby, which is why that matters as well. We also were doing this we kind of got lucky timing wise. Even though Dr. Kramer and nurse, well, actually it's really, I think Dr. Kramer, the biochemist, but they identified like the blue light was what it was important. It wasn't until the late 90s and 2000s where they honed in, and that's actually partly at Stanford, on what was the right peak wavelength. So what's the quality of blue light? The blueness is best for treating jaundice. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics have just updated their guidelines, blue LEDs. Some of you guys remember that physicists, and I think it's 2016, won the Nobel Prize for blue LEDs. So blue LED manufacturing was coming along and we were able to take advantage of that, get tightly binned blue LEDs. And for the non-engineers in the room, what that means is, when you buy blue LEDs, they can guarantee a range, and as manufacturing got better, they can tighten it around your peak wavelength. We also introduced something like Smart Tilt. One of you guys mentioned that you tilt it. If you want to have that even footprint of intensity, you need to be able to adjust for this tilting. And 75% of phototherapy devices, again from user research, we knew were being used with warmers and other devices. So the head was going to get tilted a lot. So what happens is if you tilt the head on a Brilliance device, it readjusts the brightness of the further away one, so you still maintain that even footprint. And then we called it self-assessing, which is a little bit grandiose, but what this means is we wanted to have a sense of is this product having impact? For phototherapy, it's desirable to have dosing. And what that means, or an understanding of dosing if you can, which is how long is the baby under the blue light? So there's a timer. If you have a device that is keeping track of the amount of time a baby is getting treated, you can also know the total time a device has been used. And if you know the average length of time a baby is being treated, now you can estimate the number of babies being treated by a single device by pulling that data. So we designed all of this into the device because we knew we wanted to go back and be able to see, are these products actually having intended impact? I'll talk a little bit more about that later too. And then the target price was $500. It's actually $400 within India, depending on the rupee, but for international markets, $500 plus shipping plus tariffs, and if there's a distributor margin, which we very tightly watched. So how did we find our key partners? To give you a sense, we were a team of 3.5 at the time. We were very small. We were just getting going. We knew we needed a manufacturing partner. We knew we needed distribution partners. So what we did in looking for those partners is we asked users. So we went to different hospitals and said, which medical device company responds to your servicing calls quickly? Who's very trustworthy? Which devices do you like? Which devices do you not like? And that helped us build a list of potential commercial partners that we were going to work with. And we eventually selected Phoenix Medical Systems, which is a med device company based in Chennai, India. There's a number of reasons why we were focused on India, but the primary one is that India was our launch market. And India has a program called Made in India, where the government gives preferences for tenders. So government purchases if it's an Indian manufacturer. I could talk a lot about the partnership because it was a very unique partnership at the time. And in fact, we got covered by Fast Company, the licensing deal, because it was so unique at the time between a nonprofit and a for-profit, and structuring the deal for us to incentivize impact financially. So here's a picture of some of the guys there making one of the devices. Oops, and then I'm just going to skip ahead too. I'm going to jump around a little bit because I want to get to the lessons. But to give you a sense, so the mission at Equalize Health was really around medical technologies for everyone. With Brilliance alone, we estimate that over 2.1 million babies have now been treated. And actually that data is a bit old, so it might be a bit older. And it's scaled to, I think it's 65 countries, but it's over 60. I was looking for the numbers. And some of the Equalize, if you've seen some of Equalize Health stuff, it'll say 80 countries, and that's because we had other products that went to some countries that Brilliance wasn't in. So for those of you who are looking at the health equity gap, this was the number that you should be most focused on, not the total number. Because if we make a phototherapy device, is every device going to go to a hospital and make a difference? Or a gap is no, it's not. Some are going to go to high-end hospitals, and actually that's great because that helps build credibility for us to get to other hospitals that might need more time to make a decision. But we're able to estimate this number. Remember how I told you about the total time on a device? If we know where those devices are going, the hospital and the location, we know if it's a public-private hospital, we know if it's urban or rural, and we know the country it's in. And from those three parameters, based on earlier data, we can estimate the likelihood that they had effective phototherapy before. So we're able to build an algorithm based on all of that, and then the data that we sample every once in a while to estimate this number. And so if we were doing this well, that number should actually start to decrease over time. Fortunately, we haven't been able to follow up with that. And for my policy friends in the room, we also looked at DALYs. So DALYs averted, which is about 1.45 million. So what's also really cool to me as someone who's really how do you solve a problem? And I didn't see us as Brilliance trying to solve a problem necessarily. But what we wanted to do was affect the market as well. And what we have seen is that the global price of phototherapy has come down. Are we able to show that it was us? No. Do we think we contributed to it? Yes. And actually some other really cool things too. We saw that GE in India had this is getting recorded. So I'll just say they found some sort of innovation. But you know what, again, from my standpoint is great, because if the price is lower and the quality is high, we're achieving our mission, right? And so yeah, so now some of those devices that you saw at 6,000, 10,000, even 4,000 or 3,500 now are 1,000, 1,500 and lower, and still very good quality. And then there's new data, according to Dr. Bhutani, which is just getting published, are showing a correlation between Brilliance's launch in India at a state level with, did I get the wording right? Accelerated drop in newborn mortality, which is super exciting because our sales matches this accelerated drop. And again, we can't prove that because there's other cool innovation that was happening in India at the time, like an investment in special care newborn units and other things. But it's also really exciting. For those of you who are medical, you also know that mortality, that's actually really hard to link to jaundice. And so the morbidity and the impact is probably much higher. And so, again, we can't take credit for it, but again, if we were able to contribute to that, we will be very proud. Colleagues and I. All right, so I'm going to go into lessons learned. Any questions so far, though? We'll do questions at the end. Okay, I'm going to keep going. All right. So this is our biodesign process, identify, invent, and implement. And one thing I realized is that it's so important if you're designing to address impact or addressing health equity gap, is you have to think about impact as part of the design process. And what do I mean by that? If you're designing for a closing a healthcare gap versus designing for market launch, which by the way, this is very typical in global health. They'll fund you to get to market, maybe some education campaigns, but there's not really much thinking beyond that. So if any of you guys go into funding agencies, fund to help closing the health gap, not just getting to market. And then they're also in medtech, when we talk about in the US, we do a lot of design for acquisition, which again is okay. It's just where do you need to be strategic? Because what's going to happen is you're going to make different decisions throughout the design process. And so it's just something you need to be aware of. If you're designing to solve the problem way out there, you're going to make a different decision than if you're looking to find an acquisition partner soon. So what does it look like to make impact part of the biodesign process? And don't worry, fellows, you're going to be getting some of this anyway. But it's also clarifying your impact metrics early in your design process. So this is really in the concept phase. And what would it be for Brilliance? What were some of the what were some of the impact metrics? Deaths in facilities averted. Number of babies treated who otherwise would not have been treated. You can also look at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals around newborn mortality. Designing assessment into the product. Remember that total time thing? If you're planning in advance, you can be doing that now. And that's much cheaper and more effective than like sending people around and doing surveys and interviews. Develop a predictive algorithm. Remember I told you we did that based on like the parameters of the hospitals. Again, like that's a much more affordable way. And then you can use that data to make decisions strategically for your business model and for scaling. Yeah, iterate with data collections. Also, it forces you to build your infrastructure for your data collection early, and it helps you make strategic decisions, which I mentioned. One thing I'll just mention too is that where this came in particularly handy is that we saw our sales of Brilliance and usage plateau in Uttar Pradesh, which is a state in India that had very high infant mortality all around. And it caused us to do more user research. It was really interesting. We found that number of reasons, particularly small private hospitals where a lot of poor families were bringing their baby. The doctors were just like, it's just not worth it. I'm just going to refer the baby. And so we had to understand like, what are some of the incentives? Like, what are some of the challenges? And a lot of them, like, they weren't getting enough sleep. They weren't always getting paid. There was a number of reasons why they weren't as interested in treating phototherapy in their hospitals. And all of that can inform a business model or a marketing strategy or continuing education strategy. Another lessons learned, if you guys have heard me speak before, I always talk about this. This was the first 25 units that came off the line of the V1. And even though my colleagues look very stern, I'm very excited. But 5 of these units went to the Philippines. I think, Erica, you know the story. And they got marked up by like 6 times. So even though it was designed to sell for like 500, let's be generous and put a distributor margin in of like $750, they're getting sold for $3,200, which is just like the nature of the market. Like, I'm not being judgmental, but it was like, you know, that's not what we designed for. So like a big lesson we learned very quickly is follow the product after launch. And so in the Philippines, it was very interesting too, because we ended up having 3 different distributors based on regional kind of markets there, and we made deals with them. Like, they would hold to, you know, we gave a little bit more margin, but we also said in exchange, you know, for an exclusive, you also have to send us back this hospital data that we want so we can estimate our impact and understand. But it also really helped us realize that it's not that hard to go into a new market and learn about the distributors, learn about reputation. It comes down to good user research again. And also we had some help from the US Embassy, for those of you guys interested in the Gold Key service, but that is something that the US commercial service has to help US companies reach other markets. So I'm happy to talk more about that too. Also, why do you follow the product after launch? How do you know you're having impact, right? I mean, honestly, like, if I go to only like, you know, the Fortis hospital systems in India, who's from India knows Fortis? Anyone? Okay, those are like the fancy pants hospitals. So like, you know, that's great if it's being sold, but if it's not going to the right hospitals, like, we want to know that. Next one, design for serviceability. I actually was going to take this down, but I just think it's so important because we don't talk enough about it. Because we're so focused on designing the thing and getting it to market. But, you know, there's all this user research that goes into how do you ensure that it's getting used in a sustained way? And how's it getting serviced and how's it getting maintained so it can continue to have impact and improve health outcomes. So just some really maybe obvious things, but carefully consider the spare parts, right? Because there's this aspect of the cost, like the razor blade model, not so great for health equity. Supply chain, sometimes like you just can't get certain parts, spare parts. Tariff structures in certain countries. So you want to be paying special attention to all that sort of thing. Yeah, and be careful with disposables. And disposables, again, just because of the price structure with the operating cost, often we'll put the environmental thing aside for a moment. So designing for robustness and local maintenance. It's only within like the last 15 years that we really see biomeds starting to become a real industry in many parts of the world. And often, actually, I would talk to doctors as part of user research. And I've had so many doctors say to me, like, I didn't know I was going to have to become a repair person for devices because they were the ones actually doing it or working with a local, like, handyman type person to tell them how to fix it or even to build like a homemade phototherapy device. Build servicing into your business model. This is something that's often required for tenders, but it's also potential to build into your revenue stream. And then design for staffing turnover. I mentioned this already, but this is something we really see, particularly in hospitals that are very crowded. Most hospitals in lower income areas are significantly understaffed. And it's really, really, really hard work. And this also comes in, you know, if you're asking a nurse to like take 2 more steps or in terms of like having to wash something or do something, like that's just going to be impossible. So just being really mindful of all of that. And if anyone's working in that, there's some really great papers too around nurses and Nairobi and stuff like that. So with Brilliance, we minimize consumables and check what was locally available, no surprise. So and Brilliance actually came with additional fuses, but we used fuses that were really available everywhere. And then Phoenix managed servicing as part of their distribution. And for a lot of companies, servicing is actually great advertising. Remember, that's how we found Phoenix originally. So Phoenix actually found, as they moved into new markets with Brilliance, it opened up sales to their other products because they have a certain number of other neonatal products. So just be careful with disposables. I've already kind of mentioned this. Some of you guys might have seen this, but this is a slide we sometimes show in biodesign, which is the common medtech business models in high income markets. And just a reminder that they don't always work if you're focused on health equity. So what was the commercial model? Our goal again was social impact. And really from a financial standpoint, we made money, but we weren't looking to get rich. We wanted to pay salaries. We were really focused on economic sustainability. So we wanted the device to scale wherever it was needed and have money built in for that. So the intended price, we've talked about that, 400, 500. Product development costs, the total product development cost for Brilliance was about $2 million. Strategy, we use grants for product development, so we raised that. With the idea that the product would be self-sustaining and the market would support manufacturing, distribution, scaling with all the accompanying margins because we looked at the private sector. And actually, I got a lot of flack from some donors who are like, why are you working with private sector distributors? And I was like, because they're the best at what they do. Like, I'm not going to set up a nonprofit distributor when there's for-profit distributors doing it better and cheaper. So there's just like, there's some of that funniness, which I'll talk about in a minute too. And then the kind of bigger strategy is that we license it off. We stay involved until the gap starts to close because sometimes we have to provide support and then we move on to the next project. So what you see here is the V2, which we called Brilliance Pro. I should be saying these photo on the left. This is a photo, I believe also from Uganda that someone had sent, but that's actually the V1 in it. So we ended up with 3 different phototherapy devices. So the first one was the V1 was the Brilliance Classic. You really learn about what's wrong with your product after it launches. So those of you who have designed medical devices know this already, but to give you a sense, this device, one of the big errors we made was that you needed 2 hands to lower the head. So phototherapies, they need to scope up and down, but you needed 2 hands to do that. And remember I mentioned these really busy nurses? You really need to be able to do that with 1 hand. So that was one. Another thing that we didn't do very well is the readout. You have to get right up to read it. And of course, if you're really busy, you want to be able to read it across the room. So it's these things too, like you do all your, that's one thing I was going to say, you do all your really good user research and you're still not going to get everything right. And in fact, and those of you have heard me give this kind of talk before, does anyone know what the first thing to break on a phototherapy device, at least in India usually is?
Yes.
Yes, it's the casters. So that's like, it's some of these learnings, right? And making sure that the profile of the stand can fit below the bassinet. So we got all that stuff right, but we didn't get some other stuff right. So anyway, we were already actually planning on a V2 before we wanted to even hit the market, because you have to make strategic decisions as CEO around like getting things to market versus like creep and all sorts of different things. I will mention there's this other little guy over here called Brilliance Pro with underside. So one of the things we learned with user research is that doctors prefer double surface phototherapy, which actually, if you have effective phototherapy, you only need single surface. But it became such a cultural part of many of the markets because they were used to low intensity phototherapy that they insisted that they wanted an undersurface one as well. So we told our partner that they could go ahead and use the Brilliance technology as undersurface, but like we strongly recommended that they actually only use like one baby. But that was another interesting strategic decision we made. And then last is Brilliance Pro, and that's the one that continues to be sold on the market to this day. And there's actually a light meter that we built that you can plug in. And those of you are familiar with light meters for jaundice, they run about $3,500. And this one was just an since 400, out of the 400 total, it was a $100 add-on to the phototherapy device. And this just checks for calibration, the quality of the blue light and the intensity. Oh, yeah, and I should mention, I mentioned this a few times, but you don't just iterate the products, but you're iterating your business strategy and your scaling strategy and all that other kind of stuff. All right, I think I'm gonna end with this one and then go to a few resources, but I think no surprise to you, I actually don't love the word solutions when we talk about product development, because that means solving a problem, right? Like often we're innovating and there's a lot more than the product to solve things. And so the big lesson was just really the wraparound services that were required to solve a problem. And I've kind of given indications of that before. This is Dr. Kumar, and he is a pediatrician in Jaunpur, India. And he's like president of the local association of the Indian Pediatric Association, like total rock star. And he was telling us, and this is actually him sitting in his office, and you can see he's got like decals on the wall behind him. Again, like another pediatrician you want to bring your kid to. But he was talking about just a lot of the challenges he had. I remember I told you like sometimes doctors don't get paid and sometimes all these other issues. And so one of the things we introduced in this part of India was something called telemetry. And what it was small groups. Some of you might be familiar with the ECHO model. It was based on the ECHO model, but bringing together a group of 20, 25 clinicians, and there'd be a topic. So they'd meet once a week online for 8 weeks, and there'd be a topic, a short didactic, and then one of the participants would, or two of them would present a case, and then they'd all talk about it. And so the topics actually range like, how do you get paid? Or what do you do when the parents get mad at you? And it ended up being all these different things that actually weren't related necessarily to phototherapy or even newborn care, but just like what were some of the challenges they were facing. And they ended up having like a really great community. And actually these dots represent different like hubs for the telemetry, and they were all run by local experts in that region. But that was an example of what wraparound service that we ran to support local clinicians, which just as a side note blew up during COVID because we expanded those rapidly to support all the doctors that provide COVID care. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but I am going to show, let me just show one other thing. I mentioned CPAP. We have a CPAP that's coming to market through Global Health Labs in Draeger in 2026, solving some of the problems that I mentioned in the beginning. And then there's what's called the maternal well tray, which just came to market through Matronova. But it was started by a South African doctor who had the idea. We did the engineering on it, and now it's with Matronova, and it's now in 5 countries. But it's to do rapid screening of postpartum hemorrhage in really busy hospitals. Actually, I'm going to end here. So, in our world with a lot of things going on, I always like to end with this quote, which is important to understand that development is not a nice to have, is essential for peace, stability, and progress in the world. With that, I think you all. Questions? Wait a few minutes. Yeah, Charlene.
Can you tell me more about who your grant funders were?
Sure. Yeah, it was actually a collection of mostly progressive family foundations. And so I could give you a long list, but I'm also happy to talk to you about that. But we really had a hard time raising money from traditional global health actors. And I did have a slide in here talking about that. And it was for a number of reasons. But the big one was just the global health funders were focused on data that wasn't accurate or incomplete data sets. Going back to health equity, they were focused on full-term sets. And so they didn't think jaundice was a big issue, even though Dr. Bhutani's data later showed it was a big issue. Thank you. Yeah.
In terms of like AI development, I was wondering in terms of like equity, like health equity data sets, you have to just go out and get that primary validation research like for you all did for Brilliance, or are there data sets now being kind of created or changed or that we could build like AI based off of, for example, like through academic institutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, you always need to do the user validation or user research, but I do think AI and other models, and actually I'm going to show you one other slide, offer a lot of potential for accelerating user research because there's this like learning curve in the beginning where you're really trying to get a handle of like where are the needs, what are some of the market conditions that are creating the gaps, all that stuff that I do think like data sets can help us understand much faster and be much more strategic in our user research.
Yeah.
I can tell you too, we had an audit done by an organization, ended up giving us like gold stars, but they were like, you guys could be a little bit more strategic about your user research. Because I was just like, you're in a hospital, go ask about this. Or like, you're going to a conference, go visit 3 hospitals. So it was kind of like opportunity sampling where we could have obviously been more strategic.
I was wondering, both the stories, the CPAP and the blue light were about technologies that existed in countries with like let's say higher physician power, and then we're kind of redesign to other countries. I was wondering if you had any example of like unique problems in those countries that required design that wasn't existing before.
That's a great question, and I'm sure some of you guys in the room could answer. I can't give you off the top of my head, and I also know devices really well, and I suspect there's gonna be like some pharma answers and other kind of solution sets. But let me think about that one and come back. Great question.
So once you had this design in India and launched, how difficult was it to then go like to Europe or to US or like to this research?
Yeah, so in terms of scaling,
Yes.
yeah. So I actually had some slides on scaling, which I'm kind of bumping and keep. So when we thought about scaling, so our launch target was India, and then we followed by Kenya, and that was partly like high need and market conditions. And so the Philippines is also a good example at the time of high need and strong market, because we were looking for, first of all, to start quote easy. And then scale into problems that were higher impact behind that had more market barriers. And that was also another one. There was just some countries that were very difficult to enter, like Brazil was a good one. Ethiopia because of the currency, Brazil because there was it's a long story, but just a lot of barriers to enter, even though the need was very high. We were not as interested in Europe or the US because there wasn't a gap, right? So we were interested in where there was a gap. We did end up selling into a lot of European countries, which I think is a good validation of quality. And that's something I really want to underline too. Like affordable devices does not mean low quality. We have the brain power as a community to develop world-class quality devices that are affordable for every market. And that's one of the things that drives me a bit crazy with this featuring thing. So I'm just on my soapbox as you guys go off in the world. It is totally possible that there has been a tendency in global health to make affordable equal quality. But anyway, yeah, we sold, but it came down to regulatory. Where did we strategically decide to do regulatory and that affected which markets? All right, I don't see any other questions. I will stay after, but just some last resources for those of you interested in biodesign or design for health. There's a website called Design for Health that I was part of, mostly driven by the Gates Foundation though, but lots of cool resources there. There's a whole issue of global health science and practice. If you're not familiar with this publication, but on Design for Health, human-centered design looks to the future, some really cool articles and case studies. This is one of my favorite projects right now. It's called Pathways. It's run by the Gates Foundation. Those of you who are familiar with segmentation from the business world and marketing, which is something that I think is super important as you're strategizing go-to-market and to scale. The Gates Foundation is doing a project where they apply segmentation for vulnerability of women. So that we can identify groups of women who are vulnerable and better design for them. So going back to your question around AI with users, this kind of information will help us accelerate user research, this type of work. Sarah talked about the Bay Area Global Health Alliance and some of the partnership work. This is ongoing, but like how do you have good partnerships? This is a report, an early report. But I really encourage all of you, especially those of you who are affiliated with Stanford, we are members. You can take part in any Bay Area Global Health Alliance event or anything. And then lastly, just for some of the fellows who we were talking about cost effectiveness and health equity, and some of you guys already know Health Policy from Health Affairs. They do a lot of policy stuff, but there's a really great podcast recently on how cost effectiveness can actually perpetuate. And I'm always happy to talk about more resources. Anyway, thank you all.
Well, thank you so much, Krista. We sincerely appreciate the fact that you bring a sense of humor and such deep humility and appreciation for the complexity of this work. You know, I think you've helped us all really to see that this isn't dichotomous of we do health equity or not. That all needs are equity-based, and being a really thoughtful and considered designer like yourself can help us all to think more carefully about accessibility, inclusivity, and affordability. And I think the other thing I think that you really brought home so well today, just highlighting designing with communities and not going somewhere else and designing for, but that deep partnership, deep respect, and working with people who are users in many different types of ways. So thank you so much for your generosity of time and for that brilliant presentation of being here. To close us off today, I'd also like to thank Sarah Anderson from the Bay Area Global Health Alliance and for all the work you do in this partnership. I'd also like to thank the Global Health Club, who contributed generously to today's event, as well as the Center for Global Health Innovation, who's one of our partners. Thank you to everyone who joined in person. I'd like to encourage you to stay afterwards, have stacks, mingle. It's a wonderful opportunity to meet people who have an interest in health equity and innovation from different parts of campus, because we have folks from many different groups here represented today. So please do stay and mingle. Those of you joining us online, we hope that you enjoyed today's session, and you can catch all the recordings on our YouTube channel. I would like to remind everyone that our next brown bag will be on November 20th at 9 a.m. PST, where on the topic of partnerships, we have a really exciting theme. We have the team from Global Strategies talking about the release of Nova Guide, which is clinical decision-making support software for newborns who are critically ill. Excitingly, we'll have partners from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, and sorry, it's on a slide. Uganda, Democratic Republic of Congo, and California speak about what they've learned with the partnership, some of the challenges they've had in scaling. Again, it's open to anyone online, and for all Stanford affiliates, you're welcome to join in person. And we have some exciting ones already lined up for the new year, and we hope that these series keep continuing to inspire you and provoke critical discussion in our community.